As Christmas fast approaches, we have a few responsibilities to our listeners. We have to do our best to give you good people an informative show and maybe even make you laugh a few times, even if the movie in question didn't make us laugh very much. Ooh, spoiler alert, right off the bat here. Controversial stance, too. A revival of the screwball comedy where rich old shitheads toy with their best employee's life is a good setup for a yuck fest. We're going to get into why we're not really the fans of trading places that other people are, but first we want to tell you how big of fans we are of those delightful screwballs who sell spark plug coffee. They offer up half calf and decaf for those who don't really need a pile of caffeine in their bodies. And whatever level of caffeine you put in your mug when you're about to debate nurture versus nature with your horrible brother, what'll be in there are the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada. Sparkplug has a pretty great variety of blends and roasts. There are even rotating seasonal blends on their menu, in case you like a certain type of holiday brew that didn't make as much sense to drink during the hot months. Sparkplug delivers to buyers in the US and, of course, Canada within a week. If you happen to live up here in Can land as we do, then my fellow countrymen and countrywomen, you'll get your packages shipped for free. For free. Free, I said, Bev. Free. Well, we definitely suggested that you take out a membership in Sparkaroo's Autopilot Coffee Club. Members get perks and deals and save money on every order. Casual consumers can't do things like that, baby. Unless you think you'd be joining up for a Coffee of the Month club, fear not. That's not what this is. Proof? You can customize to get your orders when it suits your needs, and you can pause or cancel any old time, especially if your bosses play God with your life and cause you to become a suicidal Santa. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES are the exact keys you should clickety-clack in your device to start browsing. You will save 20% off your next order by using Have You Ever Seen's HYES promo code. Buy Sparkplug coffee as a stocking stuffer for your mom, your husband, or your new best buddy. Okay then, Sparkplug is great, but the main event around here is always a movie review. Bev, tap Andrew on his reindeer antlers and ask him to play that theme song he came up with for this month's Christmas movies.
And action! Have you ever seen
Trading Places? Ho, ho, fucking ho, film friendlies. And thank you for spending some mid-December time with us here on Have You Ever Seen episode number 556. That ho, ho, fucking ho is something my old man used to say to people on the phone at this time of year. That's why I said it there. A little tribute to the dead guy. Anyway, we go back a ways and review motion pictures from long ago to see how they look and sound to us today. And we spoil them up, down, and all around. I'm the poor man who was given the life of a rich man and fit into that life immediately. Ryan Ellis. And here's the rich lady who was turned into a poor lady and responded to that by eventually making out with Jamie Lee Curtis. So what does she have to complain about? My wife, Bev.
That's me.
And this, of course, was Jamie Lee Curtis's first nude scene in any movie. And she seems to have felt differently about it over the years. When I was reading, sometimes she seemed like she was bothered and felt taken advantage of. And other times it's, to hell with it, I have great boobs. And she's not wrong. It made sense. Well, it didn't make sense. The movie didn't need to be that she did a nude scene. But we're not complaining.
I watched this making of featurette that's on YouTube. Probably came out with a DVD. I'm guessing when all those featurettes were made, like in the early aughts. There's this whole chunk of this documentary. We're talking like a 15-minute documentary, and they dedicate minutes just to talking about Jamie Lee Curtis's tits. Both John Landis and Jan Aykroyd have so much to say. They're like, wow. And they talk about how Steve Martin, his reaction to the film was like, yeah, it was funny, but Jamie Lee Curtis, who knew?
Well, it's not just that, it's her entire body.
She could very fairly have feelings about how she may have been coerced into doing this, how it certainly wasn't necessary for the film. It's a very 80s thing to have unnecessary, there's tons of unnecessary tits in this movie. It's clear that they were just like, boys like boobs, what do you want? It's the kind of thing that wouldn't happen now, but I truly hope that, as you say, as she's gotten older, if she looks back in this movie, that she can just be like, thank God that body is on film, because good Lord, she had like a 10 out of 10 body.
You look at Halloween, and she was still pretty young then, of course. But the other horror movies she did, and I think that was her point, is I did all these horror movies, and that's what's known for being exploitative. No nude scenes. No sex scenes in the first Halloween, which is what people think is the reason why she lived as well. But anyway, no nude scenes for her until she does a comedy, where, as we just said, isn't really necessary. But then John Landis is a controversial guy, and some people probably already know why, and if they don't, they're going to learn some lessons today. The Coming Attractions trivia question involves John Landis. Nearly every director has at least one movie on their resume that you like more than their most famous stuff or most critically acclaimed ones. John Landis directed landmark hits like Animal House. There's got to be nudity in that, I think, right? I haven't seen that in a long time. There has to be an Animal House.
There must be.
National Lampoon's Animal House. The Blues Brothers, probably nudity in that too. An American Werewolf in London, which I saw again not long ago. And of course, Trading Places. He also directed the music videos for Michael Jackson's Thriller and Black or White. I personally just don't connect with any of those projects the way I do to two other Landis films. The music videos are pretty awesome, actually. Thriller, I like more than all those things, I guess. And Black or White's pretty famous at the time for the visual effects they did. Can you guess, though, what those two movies are for me that I like more than his most famous ones?
We kind of made it easy for me because all week you've been walking around the house quoting Three Amigos. So
It's a sweater!
It has to be Three Amigos.
And also Plethora. Would you say that I have a plethora? Yes, yes, guapo, you have a plethora.
I loved Three Amigos when I was a kid.
I still do.
But I watched it as an adult and I was like, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Martin Short is the reason why I love that movie. And also El Guapo.
Yes.
And Jefe, his buddy. Steve Martin is always good. Chevy Chase is wasted. He doesn't really do much of anything in that. Martin Short, hilarious. We're not going to get paid, that's for sure.
The other one, I went through his whole roster. I was trying to see, and there was nothing that stuck out to me.
Oh, this is the one I thought you'd know for sure.
It could be Spies Like Us, but I never hear you talk about
I
Spies
saw that
Like
recently.
Us.
Nah.
Yeah. Is it Fear Itself or Masters of Horror? Those documentaries he made about horror films?
No. It's an 80s movie.
I've
seen it more than anything else he's ever made. I think we watched it not that long ago. We definitely watched the sequel, Coming to America.
I just assumed when I was looking it up that you would have put that in his pantheon of most popular films, most talked about films. Coming to America probably is.
For the average person, I don't think it is, actually.
Really?
No. I
disagree. Culturally, it's the one that's actually stuck around more than anything else he's made. Except maybe Animal House just because it was such an influential film. But even Blues Brothers, people love it. But Coming to America, that's like a juggernaut culturally.
Coming to America's Rotten Tomatoes number is only 73%.
God, in my imagination, Coming to America is his biggest film by like a country mile.
Well, it is for me. And Eddie's second best work ever is probably in that movie, playing all those characters. But even just playing Akeem, he's really great in the lead role. And so is Arsenio Hall as his buddy.
Oh, yeah, I love Arsenio Hall in that movie, yeah.
Although his best work is in Bowfinger. Maybe we'll cover that next year when it's 25 years old. Can you believe that? Well, this is only the third time we've ever covered Eddie Murphy. The other two times were the same year, 2001, Beverly Hills Cop and Shrek. Only 3 times ever for one of the greatest comedians in the history of film. One of the biggest stars in the 80s for sure, too. Okay, Sibling Rivalry was released by Paramount on June 8th, 1983. And holy God, did it rake in the money. Landis was on top of the world, like we just said. Well, until his negligence got 3 people killed while he was making the Twilight Zone movie. We'll get into that sad story a little later on. But okay, Beverly, all that said, this movie has been around for 4 decades. Remind us what it's about and give us the skinny on Trading Places.
Dan Aykroyd is Lewis, a rich, stuck-up commodities broker in Philadelphia, and Eddie Murphy is Billy Ray, a homeless hustler. Thanks to the machinations of the rich, sociopathic Duke brothers, Lewis and Billy Ray switch places. Billy Ray becomes a wealthy commodities broker, and Lewis is stripped of everything and forced to rely on the kindness of Jamie Lee Curtis's Ophelia, a prostitute, to survive. When the two men discover that their lives were turned upside down just to settle a bet, they turn on the Dukes and beat them at their own game.
By the way, of course, Lewis is Winthorpe. Or, in a nutshell, I hate orange juice. Now there's a good example of what this nutshell was created for many years ago, to miss the point of the film. But orange juice is such a huge part of this, the frozen concentrated orange juice that these guys are going to bet on. They're insider trading as well, and they get screwed over by the two guys like you just said.
And apparently they chose it intentionally because most people, when they think of commodities trading, they'll think of things like gold, coffee, big players in the stock market.
Pork bellies earlier on is talked
about
pork bellies
and frozen concentrated orange juice. Specifically, frozen concentrated orange juice, not even just oranges. It was partly to be silly and partly probably to remind us that those things can be game changers too. You can corner the market on anything.
Yeah. Sometimes
those less glamorous things are where the money really is.
Right. And of course, Randolph and Mortimer have a cameo in Coming to America.
Yeah, that's
right. Randolph! I'm not speaking to you, Mortimer. Well, maybe I've got that backwards when they're bums when Akeem gives them money. We're back! I think in Coming to America, so Coming to America, the sequel that came out a couple years ago, I think they're mentioned and they got back to where they were before, which is weird because we don't want to see them succeed again. Fuck them.
Yeah, I know. They're the true villains.
Maybe Eddie did it for a joke. Okay, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers on Trading Places. I almost said Coming to America. Let's just do that the rest of this podcast.
Let's talk about it.
Because this movie didn't make us laugh, but it did a lot of other people. 88% of critics on the site liked the movie. 7.5 out of 10 is the average. There are 52 reviews on there, and 85% of audiences. Landis' most famous movies all get great numbers on Rotten Tomatoes, although Three Amigos is a pretty serious splat, something like 45%. Animal House, 91%. Werewolf in London, 89%. Trading Places, 88. Kentucky Fried Movie, 83. Coming to America is a positive, but not nearly as strong as those ones. This was fourth at the 1983 U.S. box office. Return of the Jedi was number 1. We covered that years ago. Terms of Endearment was number 2. That's the Best Picture winner. We covered that as well. Psycho 2, which we covered back in October, was 20th that year. And A Christmas Story was 39th. And I covered that just a few days ago, this past Friday. This was nominated for 1 Oscar, and I forgot this entirely. It was nominated for any Oscars. And if someone said it was nominated for an Oscar, I would have said, maybe the screenplay. Not that it's my favorite screenplay. It was the score. Elmer Bernstein's adapted music score. And this is one of those times, and there have been different versions of scores. For a while in the 90s, there was comedy category and the drama category. But in this time frame, it was adapted score. So Yentl won. Because I wrote down in my notes originally that The Right Stuff won, because it did. But that was a different category. So they didn't just have music score. It was multiple categories. Yentl, the Barbra Streisand movie, won instead of this. And I don't think they should have won. I don't remember the score at all. Do you? Although Bernstein's awesome. We'll talk about his credits later on. And this was nominated for 1 AFI list. This makes sense, even though we don't really agree. The Top 100 Laughs. Animal House made that list, and Landis had a few others nominated for it. Blues Brothers, and I think An American Werewolf in London. But Three Amigos and Coming to America were not among the nominees. I guess I've already spoiled this multiple times over. We didn't hate the movie, but we didn't laugh very much. In fact, we barely laughed. Your thoughts?
It was definitely amusing.
Good story, too.
Yes, great story. Actually, a pretty tight script when you think about it. Not shaggy at all. They did a great job with that.
Even though it's 2 hours long.
So it's like an interesting story. It's a compelling story. And the charisma of the cast goes a long way towards making it for the fact that it's just not all that funny. Maybe it's just another case of comedy aging poorly, and I don't mean in the ways that it's insensitive, which it is. I mean, I don't really need to dig that deep into it. I don't think we're going to be blowing anyone's mind when we point out a couple things that have not aged well. But
Gorilla rape.
What's that?
Gorilla
rape.
Played for laughs.
Blackface.
Yes.
A beloved white actor doing blackface.
You know one reason they maybe got away with that? The black guy was in the scene. Now, Eddie Murphy was not really that powerful. He was getting to be powerful pretty fast. But it was only a second movie, and maybe he couldn't have objected to it. But I think a lot of people would have said that then, and maybe even now. But the black guy's sitting right there, and he's cool with it, although we don't know what he was like when they weren't filming. Maybe he didn't like it very much.
And in that featurette that I watched, they talked about how the blackface, they did get pushback from the studios.
Okay.
They didn't want them to do it. They knew it was controversial at the time. It was the 80s. And what are you going to say? And he's not in a minstrel costume. He's Jamaican. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying let's all put on our 40-year-old
But you know what makes no sense, though? Is that Beeks has already seen this man multiple times. Yeah, he's got makeup on and putting on an accent.
Well, that's
and
the other thing.
clothes,
You say, like, he has to do a pretty big disguise. But it would.
He barely looks different, though.
He barely
all that stuff.
Also, he's clearly wearing makeup. No person would look at him for more than a split second and not know that's a white man wearing blackface.
Which is the joke in Silver Streak when Gene Wilder does it, too.
Oh, yeah?
And Richard Pryor's right beside him. So, again, I think people thought at the time, well, Richard Pryor's character, and maybe even himself, is okay with this. I don't know if Pryor was in reality.
It's one of those things that has been stripped of all nuance. Remember when I was like, I don't even want to get into it. Okay, well.
Well, you said a few minutes ago there's no fat or unnecessary scenes in it. I think that train scene is too long. But the train scene didn't make sense from the standpoint of this Beeks guy has got very important information, and they can just go into his train berth, and all these people can. That didn't make sense right there, because you can actually get your own private berth, and he certainly would have paid for that in case something like this happened. If, I don't know, if it weren't these people trying to screw him over, somebody else could have maybe held him up just because.
I think the scene was probably in there because it was funny.
They
not
think so.
To us.
Yeah. You're
but
right.
again, if we had seen it in 1983... I'm sure there's plenty of things that I laugh at now that if I see them 30 years from now, I'll be like, what did I like about this so much? There's other films that we've watched that have aged really well. Or they age well because you remember how much you liked it the first time you saw it, and that's always going to be in your heart. You're always going to find it funny because you can always take yourself back to that time and place.
Yeah.
But I think it probably was funny in 1983, and like all comedy, it just...
Not all comedy.
You're right.
Coming to America is still funny. It's only 5 years later.
I bet there's plenty of people who would watch Coming to America now. If we were to show our niece and nephews Coming to America, do you think they would find it funny? Do you think they would laugh the same way that we laughed at that age?
One of Eddie's greatest jokes of all time is in that movie, and that has nothing to do with... And by the way, I'll get to that in a second, but just to make clear, if people are sitting there thinking, oh my God, here they go again. Look, the more the days go on, the more I'm fucking sick and tired of this woke shit, even though I agree with a lot of it. I'm not bringing it up for that reason. I'm bringing it up because we weren't sitting there saying, well, this is not right. Long before the train scene, we're sitting there thinking, maybe an hour in, we went to the washroom and said, have we laughed yet? Chuckled a little bit.
It wasn't because it was offensive, which
it wasn't
there's plenty
funny.
of stuff that's offensive. It just wasn't
and
funny.
It wasn't that it wasn't funny because we're bothered by it. It's so wrong. It's I'm not laughing at this. I want to.
You and I were never like, oh my God, I can't enjoy this movie because there's too many topless women than there needs to be, because there's blackface, because there's a character that says the N-word with a hard R in it. These are not things that would have ruined the movie for us, because we can just watch it in context, and I guess in fairness too, we're not the kind of people that it would be offensive to. But no, we just don't find it funny.
The movie as a whole
just didn't find it funny.
Wasn't making us laugh. Now here's the Eddie Murphy scene that I think anybody could laugh at any time, forever. It's after he's fallen in love with, I forget her name, but the love interest in Coming to America. He's out on his balcony in Queens, because earlier the cab driver said, fuck you. So then I'm in love. And everyone's, shut up. Hey, fuck you. Yes, fuck you too. Because he thinks it's good. And Eddie is hilarious in that moment. Plus, he's great playing all the characters, as is Arsenio in that movie. So yes, a lot of things in that movie would still be funny, I think, to anybody. We
go back and we watch these movies from like the 30s, 40s, 50s. They're supposed to be the great comedies of all time, and you see the baby boomer movie critics talk about them with this great reverence and how hysterical they find them. And we go, yeah. Always amused, and you might get a good laugh here and there out of a film. But it's pretty rare that we go back and watch those old movies and laugh it up the way we do about movies that are made now.
Yeah, Singing in the Rain remained funny when I saw it again. I've seen it a few times since we covered it for the podcast. His Girl Friday was still pretty damn funny. Lady Eve is still really funny. And I could probably name a few others. But I just covered Ball of Fire a few weeks ago, and I really enjoyed the story, but I didn't really laugh.
Right. And even as I say, like, oh, we find movies right now so funny, that's not even true. I think humor is kind of like music, that you're always going to have this super attachment to things that came out when you were a certain age. If you're between the ages of 13 and 25, the movies that you fell in love with then are just always going to have this special place in your heart. You're always going to find them funny. And there's plenty of movies like that I wouldn't dare show to our niece and nephews. I wouldn't want to see them sitting there dead face being like, what do you even like about this movie? Yeah, it would like ruin it for me. There was something, a movie I liked when I was like 14 years old that you and I watched together, She-Devil. I'm not defending it. It's not a good movie. I
didn't laugh once.
And you hated it. And I was like,
Meryl was really good. Roseanne's awful.
If I had just watched it by myself, I would have had this beautiful nostalgia bomb, and I could have totally admitted that it wasn't as good as I remembered, but I would have enjoyed it a lot more had you not been sitting there beside me, dead-eyed, being like, what is the point of this?
Well, I get the point.
And it kind of ruins it for me.
I know what the point was. I just didn't laugh at the movie. I'd never seen that one before. That was truly a first viewing. I do hear myself, believe me, listeners. I've listened to a lot of podcasts where you think, okay, I fucking get it. You made your point. I know we've probably done this to bother people sometimes, and maybe they're long gone from listening to us anyway. We're going to be aware of these things. Sometimes I hate myself for noticing, oh my God, there's a panel on a talk show. Is there a black person there? I go to that level like any 24-year-old know-it-all does. Is there a woman on that talk show?
If I see a panel on a talk show and every single person is a white man, I'm like, well, that's a mistake. Maybe depending on the topic. There's certain things that you could probably talk about where it's not as big a deal, but I bet 20 years ago even, you would have a panel strictly of white men talking about the plight of black women.
Yeah, sure.
And they could be just passed off as experts and nobody would blink an eye about it.
But here's the interesting thing about Trading Places is that you've got a white guy as, well, he's top billed, so he's the main star, Dan Aykroyd. But then you got a newcomer to movies. He only made one before, and that was 48 Hours, Eddie Murphy, black guy, obviously. Breaking news. Jamie Lee Curtis, I guess the third lead, woman. And then you got the other two main characters are two old guys, one of whom who hadn't acted in something like 13 years, Don Ameche. He didn't think he was going to ever be in a movie again, I guess, because he was not old, but he was getting up there. He'd worked in TV movies, and I think maybe TV shows. But somebody thought, oh, let's get him in this. They wanted somebody else. I think it was Ray Milland. And then instead, Ameche was chosen. He's the one that says the N-word. I think actually it's important he does, because that's what really galvanizes Eddie, overhearing them talk about how, first of all, they made a bet on both of these guys' lives, don't care about either of them, including the one they knew, Aykroyd's character, Winthorpe, to be so cavalier about him. It's bad enough to treat Eddie Murphy this way. And Randolph seems to legitimately like Billy Ray, too, so for him to talk about, get rid of, but it's Ameche that says the N-word. But Bellamy agrees with him entirely. First, we're not going to have that type of person running our family company. I think it's an important moment. It's also not on screen when he says it. I wonder if that was a deliberate touch, too. I think you see Eddie Murphy's face.
See his reaction. Yeah. Well, because his reaction is important. I 100% agree. I don't think that we need to scrub the N-word of films, and there's plenty of times where it's important for context, and that's a perfect example.
But guess what? What word did Ameche have a problem with at the end? Okay, this is what I was about to say.
When he first read the script, was like, okay, I would love to do the movie. I will come out of retirement to do this movie for you. But at the end, when his brother has a heart attack, as they've lost all their money in the stock market, they've been totally ruined, and his brother's having a heart attack, and someone's like, look at your brother. And he says, fuck my brother, sell the stock. And he didn't want to say fuck. And he tried to get them to change the script and they wouldn't do it. And then when they were on set doing it, he was like, listen, crew, don't screw this up. I don't want to do more than one take. I don't want to say this word more than once. Now, to his credit, he totally sells the line. But he makes this big stink about saying fuck. But he apparently did not have a problem saying a word that I won't even speak aloud on this podcast. But he has no problem saying that word. That never comes up. It never came up in the interviews I was watching where they were talking about it.
I think both of those words that are used, the F word and the N word, are both bad, but necessary. And at the same point...
And he's a villain.
That's what I was going to say. At the same point, they've already been established, especially him. I think he's even worse than Randolph, because at least Randolph is nice to Billy Ray through the whole movie. And Mortimer's just barely accepting him, but he wants to win the bet. Because it's Randolph, obviously, that believes that Billy Ray can turn into Lewis just by being in his apartment and having his job and having his clothes and all that kind of thing. And because he's Eddie Murphy, and because he's written this way, he charms people immediately and they like him. And he also has a knack for commodities. He seems to understand it in a way that you wouldn't expect. Doesn't matter if he's black, just a person who's never done it. I don't get anything. I don't get the ending of this movie. I guess we'll get to that later on. I do not know what happened. I've seen this twice. I read it. There's so much stuff on Wikipedia about this film, and I read it all at work a couple nights ago. I still don't get it. I never understood the stock market. I'm not a money person. If we ever get rich, we're hiring somebody to take care of our money, and they might fuck me because I'm not going to know if they did or not. I just don't know, and I never got it. I was terrible at, what do you call it, economics? In class. I took a class, and I either did fail or almost failed. Didn't fail anything in school. I almost failed that. But Billy Ray does get these kinds of things. And then obviously he and Lewis, who does know what he's doing in the first place, he's been doing this for a long time, are able to go to the World Trade Center exchange floor. See if I get this right. I guess we'll talk about it now after all. They bump the stock up by having insider trading information. Well, first of all, the Dukes had that, but then they get it from Beeks. That's why they're in the train in the first place on New Year's Eve. They switch briefcases with Beeks, and then, of course, he ends up in the cage with the gorilla and probably dies of being raped in the... Jesus. We watched, by the way, a bit of a sidebar, the Prank Monkey episode of The Simpsons not long ago, which is really funny. That's the, my eye, I'm not supposed to get pudding in it. That's in that episode. But also, early on, Homer is raped by a panda. Why do we think it was funny even then, let alone now?
I know.
But okay, fine. So that happens to Beeks in here. But they get the paperwork from him. They put in the wrong paperwork. But I still don't get it, because if these guys were going to do something when it came to the orange juice futures, and that was what they wanted. It wasn't, we need insider trading on something, and when you get it to us, Beeks, then we'll use it. It was going to be orange juice all along. They get orange juice information, but then these guys give them the wrong information.
Yeah, they switch it up with the wrong so that they'll make the wrong decision about what they're going to do. If anyone listening wants to do a deep dive into how futures work, The Big Short, it'll actually
if I may, by the
explain
way,
it.
if I may quote Philadelphia, like I'm an 8-year-old. Please tell me like I'm an 8-year-old.
This is one of those things that every time someone explains it to me properly, I go, oh, now I get it. If I were asked to explain it to you, it's like it's the ether. It just goes away and I no longer understand it. I tried to wrap my head around what happens here, and eventually I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter. The script is good enough that you just understand the good guys are winning and the bad guys are losing. Now, they did hire consultants to make sure that it made sense so that they could realistically say, not only will they get rich, but they will ruin them. And the one thing I always remember from The Big Short, from Too Big to Fail, Margin Call, all these movies that they did make about the 2008 financial crisis.
Margin Call is what happens to the Dukes. They can't
it literally
cover the
is a margin call. Yeah. The one thing I always understood is that if you're buying futures, Dumb Money also gets into this quite a bit. There's no limit to how much you can lose on futures. Now, if you're just buying a stock, it can go up, it can go down, but you will never lose more money than you paid for the stock in the first place. Okay. But when you buy a future, you're saying, I promise to sell you this stock for $30 in the future. And they can call on that promise whenever they want. I promise to sell you this stock for $30, and then the stock goes up to $150. And you have to sell it to them for $30, even though it's worth that much. And so you're losing. You have to borrow the money to acquire the stock so that you can sell it to them, because you don't even own the stock when you buy the futures. It's convoluted, and it should 100% be illegal. And it is crazy to me that the financial system can work under these circumstances.
But aren't there laws? I was reading online about the Eddie Murphy law or something like that?
Yes, they changed laws because of this film, because I guess it was easier to do the insider trading like you see here, but they made it illegal to get the information ahead of time. They cited this popular film when they were like, well, this shouldn't be allowed to happen. These rich people should not be allowed to have a one-up on everyone else and rig the game,
but it's funny,
so that
though,
they're going to win.
The flip side of that is that our quote-unquote heroes also are involved in insider trading by taking the insider information.
100%.
And they get really rich.
I mean, it was the 80s. The heroes have to get rich.
Look at Back to the Future. That was Crispin Glover's big problem at the end of that movie, is that he didn't like that Marty got the big truck and the family got so wealthy compared to what they were before. They're not really that wealthy. They still live in that same house, the same neighborhood and everything, but, well, obviously the same neighborhood if they're in the same house. He didn't pick up the house and move it somewhere else. But this movie's got the same kind of ending. Our heroes get financially rewarded.
It's the 80s. Reagan was president.
Did
Getting
you notice
rich was
that?
a virtue.
Reagan is the picture sitting beside other Randolph or Mortimer, and Nixon's the other one.
Is the other one. Oh, speaking of Nixon, and you were talking a little bit about Beaks. When you look at the behind-the-scenes stuff on how this movie got made, by far the most interesting stories come from the casting decisions that they made and the casting decisions that Landis insisted upon. I don't think he's the world's greatest director. No. I don't think he has a ton of vision, but has a great eye for telling a good story.
And very talented people he chose for this.
And he knows how to cast a movie, and he knows how to let the cast shine. Because you look at his films and you see great comic actors giving some of the greatest performances of their career.
Maybe not here.
Maybe not here. No, but Coming to America is certainly Eddie Murphy. Has he ever been better in a film playing all those different parts? He said it was one of his favorite films he ever made.
Yeah. Belushi is best known probably for SNL, but if it's not that, it's for Animal House and the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, of course.
Both Landis films.
Yeah. He mostly got his way when he was casting. They originally wanted Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, which I could 100% see this movie with those two.
Sure.
They had already made a few films together. They're a very popular duo, but this was right around the time that Pryor had the accident where he lit his hair on fire when he was freebasing and injured himself quite bad. He had pretty bad burns, so he had to drop out of the film and they had to cast fresh. He had worked with Aykroyd on Blues Brothers, of course. He hadn't proven himself in other films, but Landis fought for him, and he's like, I know him, I know he can do this 100% right. I'm not a huge fan of Dan Aykroyd. I love him in this movie, playing the stuck-up East Coast New England rich
I
dick.
said to you in the first 20 minutes, says he miscast, but then later on when he is traded places, then he's not miscast. Oh. Eddie does both parts well. If Eddie had, what's that movie called? The Distinguished Gentleman, which I don't know if I've ever seen. But I can see him playing a posh dude. I think that's what he does in that movie. I'm assuming so, based on the name of the movie.
I don't know that movie.
Eddie's not the greatest actor of all time, but he is one of the greatest comic actors of all time.
His energy.
And he is a good actor, of course.
Yeah.
But he makes perfect sense as Billy Ray in the opening scenes as the con man, and those cops pick him up, and I can see, and I can walk.
He slowly lowers his feet down so that he's standing all of a sudden.
Because he's playing, he has no feet at all, no legs at all.
Yeah.
I thought he was that character, that bum, a lot longer than he is. He's very briefly the bum.
It's funny, we're talking about all the things in this movie that are, quote, offensive. But if you look at the plot of the movie and the characters, there's lots of stuff, I don't want to say progressive, but you have a black homeless hustler. Someone going for a cheaper laugh would have just totally been telling a fish out of water story and had him... And apparently he rewrote a lot of the lines because he was like, these are white people. This is what they think black people talk like. But I'm going to talk like actually black people talk. And then you get like a much more authentic portrayal and a better performance out of him. But they could have just cheapened it and made him a goof who doesn't understand rich people. And, oh, look how wacky he is, blowing up all these snobby rich people's lives. But no, they made it so that he wants to fit in. And he's smart. And he can. And you can see him trying and failing and trying again. You can see him realizing that his dirtbag friends are no good. This is something that's worth fighting for. Now that I have it in my clutches, however I got it, I don't want to lose it. It's worth changing myself to achieve it. And he's smart enough and he's good at the job. And he's certainly clever enough to beat them at their own game at the end. He has more integrity than these guys as well.
Yeah.
Also, Ophelia. I think Landis himself admitted... This character is a complete ridiculous fantasy.
Hooker with a heart of gold.
Hooker with a heart of gold and a 401k. Not a 401k, but she says that all her money's in T-bills. She has something like $40,000 saved from street walking. Yeah. If you were a high-class prostitute, then I can see that.
Lives alone, too. Even in the 80s, that would obviously be more money if you're not sharing the rent with somebody
Philadelphia. It's not New York. She seems to be doing very, very well for what she's doing for her job. And, okay, fine. I buy it. But her... being so sweet to him, she doesn't owe him literally anything. He's kind of mean to her from the jump. Yeah. She's so nice to him for no reason. She's so smart and she's so ballsy and she's bossy. Calls all of her own shots, and of course she's beautiful.
And she'd never done comedy before too, so this was truly out of her wheelhouse, or at least what we thought was her wheelhouse, which was horror.
Studio did not want to cast her. She was the scream queen. They didn't believe she could do comedy. She really wanted to branch out and do something else, and Landis wanted her for the part. She had just made $1 million to be in Halloween 2. And she made $70,000 to be in this film. But, as she has said, Landis changed her life when he cast her in that movie, because from that moment on, people understood that she could do anything.
I wouldn't dispute that's probably because she's a woman that she got such little amount of money. But I remember Clint Eastwood said when he made Play Misty for Me, his first movie as a director, he said, I will direct it for free. I'm sure he got paid to be an actor because he's also the star. But he said, that's the way it should be. I'm directing my first movie. I shouldn't be making... He must have given the director scale, at least at that point. I think you have to
make scale.
Maybe he wasn't in the guild yet. He had never directed. But the point is that he was saying, you got to build up. Even if you're an established name like JLC was, at least in the horror genre. If you want to change your career that way and take a whole big left turn, then maybe you do have to sacrifice something
like
to
anybody,
do that.
like if you or I wanted to take a big left turn in our careers, we would probably have to take a big pay cut. I'm an editor and I edit a certain kind of content. If I wanted to go from editing lifestyle television, which is what I do now, to editing feature films, I would be starting from the bottom.
You'd be making peanuts.
I might even be assisting for a while. I would basically have to start from scratch. No, I totally understand why she did that. She's clearly happy she did it. It really did change her career, and then she had such an incredible career. Just one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses when she won her Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Not the movie I would give her an Oscar for.
Stephanie Hsu
I don't even think it's the movie. What's that?
Stephanie Hsu should have won for that.
I did love her in that movie. There was so many.
Or even Hong Chow in The Whale. I loved her in The Whale. I didn't like The Whale, but I liked her in The Whale.
Yeah.
Carrie
She'll
Condon.
win her Oscar.
Carrie Condon and the Banshees of
Inisherin.
I would say all three of them were ahead of. And JLC was good, and so was Angela Bassett, who was pissed off she didn't win. All five of them were very good. Nobody was a bad choice. But JLC was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. Still one of the greatest speeches of all time.
Unbelievable speech. Absolutely.
We won an Oscar, crew. We won an Oscar, fans. We won an Oscar, my fellow...
Genre film fans.
Not just that crew for that film, but all of my crews and all of my fellow castmates. And then, of course, a tribute to her parents. Yeah, so the actors are very likable in this. Aykroyd, I thought was miscast, but then later on when he gets to be funny, we weren't laughing, but then he's in his wheelhouse. Not that he can't play drama. He did it in Driving Miss Daisy and got nominated for that later in the decade. Just like she did other comedies. She did A Fish Called Wanda, which apparently this is one of the reasons why Cleese picked her. He saw this movie and thought, oh, this woman can do comedy. And she's
amazing
sexy.
In that movie.
And she's fun. And she's great in True Lies. And, of course, she's funny in EEAAO, another comedy she's done over the years. And she's done horror since, obviously, the Halloween movies, the more recent years. They were, well, at least the first one was a huge hit. The other ones, not so much. And she became a true star. I guess she was a star, but now this helped her become a bona fide star. We love Eddie Murphy right from the start. 48 Hours is still really funny. I saw that a few years ago. Well, it's at least a really good movie that I do laugh at, not a hilarious comedy. Then this, a movie I forget, Best Defense or something like that. Okay, forget that. Beverly Hills Cop, we covered that. I still thought that was very funny. I love the story. We talked about him fitting in as an actor or as a character in his movies. He fits in with the Beverly Hills Cop guys in a way, even though he doesn't. That's the whole point. He's the fish out of water in Beverly Hills, especially as a black guy, but even just as this Midwestern,
we're always laughing with him.
Non-rich
he
cop.
Always has one over on everybody else in the room with him, because as much as he doesn't come across as what we think of as a smart intellect, his wit comes from an incredible
and street
intellect.
smarts, common sense.
Yeah.
The
You
actor
can't tell me
himself.
that man is not one of the smartest people in the world. To be that fast as his mind works.
Well, also, we talked about speeches with Jamie Lee Curtis at the Golden Globes when he got the, what's it called again? The
musical comedy?
Cecil B. DeMille Award.
Oh.
So it's Lifetime Achievement Award. Cecil B. DeMille, I believe it was a couple years ago. It must have, well, it had to have been after the slap, because he said about how pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your fucking mouth. And of course they bleeped the fucking. One of his greatest laughs ever was at an award show because it was so unsurprising. He was so muted, that whole thing. It wasn't a very long speech compared to what other people have done in the Golden Globes for the Cecil B. DeMille Award. I don't think he was ever funny in the whole thing until the very end when he was just hilarious at that last few seconds.
Amazing.
So yeah, the casting's great. The old guys are really good as Randolph and
also great.
Mortimer.
Yeah, like we said, Ameche came out of retirement after 13 years. Landis thought of him, calls his old agency. They're like, he hasn't worked here for 10 years. The rumors were that he was dead.
Yeah.
They had to work to find him, and he was retired. He had made enough money. He had to really be
he retired from
coerced
film
into doing
acting
it.
because he was still making TV movies. I saw quite a few things in the 70s. Because I read that note like you did and thought, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Oh, look closer. TV movie, TV show, I think it's some
And
cases.
he's wonderful. This is what I say. Maybe this is Landis's great gift, that he just had in his mind who would be perfect in the film. And Ameche really is amazing in this movie. You can't credit him enough for being jovially evil, kind of banality of evil, that you just have a person who's never once been asked to consider what the consequences of his actions are. And then from this, I guess his profile got built up again, and then the next movie he did, but
2 years later,
2 years later he made Cocoon, and he won an Oscar for it. Yeah. I forgot that he won an Oscar for Cocoon.
Another note about the brothers, though, is that as bad as they are as characters, they're well played by the actors, but as bad as they are, Randolph to me is more redeemable. So I think Ralph Bellamy, the way he's played, because for one thing, it's the other one that says the casual N-word, and of course the other one agrees, but he's not the one that says it. He's the one, like we said, that actually seems to like Billy Ray. This isn't just, well, I want to win this bet, so I'll pretend to be nice to him. It's not like he ever leaves a scene, Eddie ever leaves a scene, and then Ralph Bellamy does fucking guy. So he seems like he could be redeemable, but they live together. They wear the same outfit with just slightly different, was it a tie? And they're basically wearing the exact same clothes. There's no implication that these two ever do anything with each other, but there's no women anywhere. The pictures on their desks are of presidents, the ex and the current.
So this was based on, I don't know if it was the writer or if it was Landis that played tennis at a club. With
the writer.
Two rich brothers also played, and they were bickering all the time, and there were just these two old rich guys that
also had
never
a lot of
stopped
bets,
fighting,
I think.
And had little bets, and so he was like, I gotta write a movie with characters just like this. And before we get away from casting, I tried to make this point earlier and kind of got distracted. Who's the actor who played Beaks?
Paul Gleason.
Right. So originally they wanted to cast G. Gordon Liddy. Mm-hmm. G. Gordon Liddy was one of the men who broke into the Watergate. A lawyer, not even an actor.
I'm not sure that's even the worst thing he ever did, too, from what I heard about Liddy.
You're probably right. He was gonna be in the movie. Obviously, that would have had a lot of cachet at the time that everybody knew who he was from this scandal. It would have been stunt casting.
But Gleason has quite a bit of acting to do in this movie.
They could have given him a bigger part because of that. Maybe if they'd gotten Liddy, because it was stunt casting, they may have just made his role reduced. But you know what stopped him from doing it? The scene with the gorilla. And he's like,
yes.
I'm okay with being silly in this movie and being a villain, but I don't want to be raped by a gorilla on film. And they were like, okay, we'll just cast someone else. God forbid we don't have bestiality in the movie.
Which is never shown. It's obviously just implied.
Yeah.
And they're being shipped off to, I think, Africa, too. So if eventually Beaks will be discovered to be a human being in a costume, I don't know how he's going to live what this gorilla already did to him, let alone what will come on the trip, but he's got to get home from Africa. And now his benefactors are broke.
Yeah.
And become beggars in New York. When I saw Coming to America the first, I guess probably several times before I ever saw this movie, I didn't get that joke.
Yeah, I'm sure I didn't get that joke.
And the whole thing, we're back. Okay, so Akeem's nice to two old guys. Great. The Coming to America podcast continues. We should have covered that this year, I guess. But we wanted to cover a movie that's got Christmas scenes. This has a lot of Christmas scenes in it. The movie takes place over Christmas. It's not really a Christmas movie in the sense of it doesn't really matter that it's Christmas. It's like the Die Hard argument. Clearly a Christmas movie in the sense of when it's set and you see trees and lights and all that kind of stuff constantly. But the story could have been in the middle of July or in September or whenever in Die Hard. This is the same thing. It doesn't matter that it's Christmas, but it is. We see trees all over the place. We see a tree being decorated on Christmas Eve. I just talked about that on Friday, that they trim the tree on Christmas Eve. I'll ask that question now, sitting across from a human, rather than speculating to myself. Is this an American thing when you trim the tree on Eve?
I really feel like it's a television
Maybe
thing.
It's a TV movie thing.
Because why don't you want your Christmas tree up for a few weeks? You're going to decorate it and then take it down a week later? And
people around here had their lights out in mid to late November. They must have had their trees up, too.
Maybe it's because we live so far north. The days are really short, and it is like...
They're short in Philadelphia, too.
That's true.
And New York.
Yeah, Philadelphia's not that far south.
But this movie also takes place on New Year's Eve for a while on the train. Jim Belushi was in this. I think John must have died.
Credited as James Belushi.
Right. And it was going to be that John would be the Billy Ray character, and Dan Aykroyd would have played Lewis. But it's better to have a black guy play this, because the whole point is that they don't say the N-word till towards the end of the film. But obviously there's a disdain from these really rich guys towards a street person anyway, but especially someone who isn't white. If that character was John Belushi, if he played it like he does in Animal House, I guess you could still think, oh, he's the slob, he's this buffoon, so you'd have disdain for him for that reason. And John Belushi wearing a suit would have cleaned up and looked fine. And he did a movie with Aykroyd called Neighbors, where they traded roles. And Belushi was the straight arrow, and Aykroyd was the wacky one in that movie. Not that Aykroyd didn't get to play fun. He's actually, for the most part in Ghostbusters, he's the serious one. He's the heart of the Ghostbusters. It's Bill Murray that gets to be the goof off and be the one that gets all the laughs. And Rick Moranis, of course, too.
Yeah.
Aykroyd's not funny in Ghostbusters, but he and Egon are the more sensible ones, and it's Murray and the other guys that get all the laughs. The storyline, I guess intentionally, is basically God and Job. These guys are playing God with their Job. Louis Winthorpe is not the greatest human being of all time, but when he meets with the Dukes early on, what did he say? Something like minimum wage. They say, oh, we have to pay that, or that's bullshit, or whatever it is that they say. And you got to pay them at least minimum wage, sir, or something like that. Just to show that even this guy, who's not exactly somebody you'd want to hang with in the early part of the film, doesn't have complete disdain for the unwashed masses who are barely getting by. And then he has to go through such hell, almost commit suicide. I don't think Job in the Bible story ever gets that far. God and Satan bet on this guy, Job, who's God's most loyal servant. The point is, Satan says to God, he's only loyal to you because you treat him well. He's got all these things. All right, fine. Let's have a bet. You take them away. The guy loses everything, including his family. They're all dead.
Literally kills all his children.
He gets boils.
Yeah,
he's physically in pain.
He loses all of his
But he
farm.
never curses God.
Yeah.
Now, the difference in this, of course, is that in the end, Lewis doesn't curse them, but he fights back. He doesn't just take it and say, yeah, but they were my bosses. And, of course, he's also indirectly related.
He doesn't curse them. He goes to the party and makes that huge stink where he steals the food and...
I guess that's their version of cursing. I just meant in the sense of, in the Bible story, it's Satan wants at some point for Job to say, I renounce you, God, or fuck you, God. Well, I wouldn't say fuck you back then, I guess, but I renounce you. That's what he would want to do, and he never does, is my point. But in this movie, of course, Lewis is pushed so far over the edge, and then when he hears why, it's a bet, and they were going to say, fuck you when this is all over with, because they're not going to restore him to his old life. Here's a question for you. Do you think he would have taken that? If they had won, and Billy Ray's out in the street, back where he was in the first place, and Lewis was just given his life back, would he go back to doing what he was doing before?
Well, I don't think he would have worked for them, but he certainly would have restored his reputation. Something about this film that's not hard to believe, but whatever, maybe a little convenient, is that nobody seems to have one true friend in this entire film. Lewis, all his friends turn on him the second they hear. Nobody wants to hear his side of the story. His fiancée leaves him. Nobody seems to really care about him at all. And Billy Ray discovers that all his friends are scumbags who are just interested in destroying his home and partying with him and don't care about him at all. I said in the intro that he fits into that life immediately. I didn't laugh at that, but I did like the notion that right away he's wearing a nice suit. He brings all these people over, a lot of prostitutes and whatnot. People are doing all kinds of things in this place. Why wouldn't they? This is the way they live. They know that this isn't his because they know who he is. So it isn't that they're ruining his place. They're ruining somebody else's place. But he is bothered by that right away. Yeah, and he doesn't have a real friend, and Lewis doesn't have a real friend.
Mm-hmm. And neither does Ophelia, does she?
We don't really learn enough about her to know. She is a true friend to Lewis.
Well, then they all become
even
friends.
Before, of course, they all make all this money together, and that's great. But even before there's any money involved, when there's no good motive for her to be nice to Lewis at all,
yes, there
she's
is.
Incredibly kind to him.
He's her meal ticket.
But he has no money. What are you talking about?
No, but she thinks that what happens at the end is what can happen. She doesn't know that's what's going to happen specifically.
But she's nice to him before she knows he can make her rich.
But she says that I'm going to take care of you because this is my investment.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And
she's not doing it sinisterly. Is that a word? She's not doing it with sinister motives, but that's what she says.
She doesn't treat it like a job. She obviously does take good care of him and seems to care about him.
Shows an awful lot of restraint on his part not to try something when she gets in bed with him with nothing on, or at least no top on.
For no reason. Why not? You could put a shirt on. I think he has a fever. Is that what it is?
Yeah, he's not
trying
well.
to warm him up.
Yeah, he's sick.
Yeah, you could.
And she gets topless twice, too.
Oh, yeah.
This could be played for laughs. I don't know why they did this, though, unless it's supposed to be funny. But both the guys, Eddie and Aykroyd, have sweaters on in the Virgin Islands. It's a sweater! In the Virgin Islands, yet the women are wearing bikinis. So you could argue it's cold there, which it probably wouldn't be ever anyway. Okay, you had one cold day, but the women are wearing bikinis.
It's either a cold day or it's not, because, the women are in
Maybe it's just a running joke for Landis, because when they get El Guapo, that sweater, it's in the fucking desert in Mexico. What does he need a sweater for? And he's so glad he got it. It was a birthday present.
And Coleman, the butler, played by Denham Elliott. Another great bit of casting where he feels very convincing. Not wearing a sweater, but wearing a jacket, full sleeves. Yeah.
We got to talk about it. Twilight Zone. They filmed the Twilight Zone movie. So Spielberg has a segment in that. I think he produced it as well, or one of the producers in it. Joe Dante has a segment in that, and so does George Miller. So huge names. Dante is really the one that stands out because he was still relatively new to filmmaking. Well, not that new, but he wasn't a big name like Spielberg was. Miller from The Road Warrior and Mad Max and maybe something else. And then Landis from the movies we've been talking about. This was a mega movie coming off that famous TV show. I think the movie did okay in the end, and it came out the same year as this. They filmed this after the Twilight Zone movie, though, because that happened, the accident that happened. Vic Morrow, Jennifer Jason Leigh's dad, plays a character who's a racist, and then he goes through, because it's Twilight Zone, a weird thing where he's the one who's being targeted. But he ends up with two, I guess it's Vietnamese kids in this stunt scene where a helicopter comes low, and then they actually died because the helicopter went out of control, and it chopped two of their heads off and then crushed the other kid. The two kids were up past when they should have been. Their parents apparently weren't on set. And also, people were saying to Landis, we're not ready yet. This isn't quite right. But we got to shoot. We're going to lose the helicopter. I don't know why. I guess the budget, whatever it was.
All the pressures of being on set. Yeah. This is not an uncommon story.
And one of the things I give Landis a little bit of slack about, just a little bit, is that I don't think this would be that unusual if the name was George Miller that did this. Had it been Richard Attenborough when he made Gandhi the year before that. Had it been Spielberg. I told you the story about David Lean when they made Dr. Zhivago, which we caught a little bit of on TCM a few days ago. We weren't really watching. It was just in the background. And I think it's that movie where some woman got hurt in some train scene, And the story I heard was, okay, we'll get her out of the way. We're going in 5.
The woman died, too.
She died
not on the set.
I think
like,
in
not
hospital.
Right there.
Yeah.
But she got hurt very, very badly. And they were just like, okay, we'll take care of her, but we got to keep going. We got to keep shooting.
And I'm not forgiving him either, but I guess the argument could be, and I said this to you when we were downstairs a couple days ago, what's he supposed to do? He's not the doctor.
People are making decisions under an incredible amount of pressure. Every minute costs so much money on a film set that people are going to, of course, let them influence their decisions. And if you have to choose between safety and an extra day on set, we could do the right thing, but that's going to cost us, I don't know, ballparking here, an extra $50,000 because we're going to lose the day. We're going to have to get the helicopter back. That's going to cost us that much money. We're losing light. If we don't just do this now, if we don't just take the chance, if you can't put yourself in that position and understand the temptation to just take your chances.
Also, quickly, a guy that made a stunt movie in the Blues Brothers where they probably had all kinds of crazy things going on, and it worked. Nobody got hurt or killed. I don't think so.
Now, I can't confirm or deny, but I had a friend who worked on Blues Brothers 2000. I remember him telling me that one of the stunt performers died on that set as well.
Oh, God.
Yeah, no kidding.
You think Landis would be the most careful person of all time
You
after
would
that?
think. John Landis, as well as his son, they have pretty rotten reputations for being like real jerks. Nobody has nice things to say about these people other than their movies made money. John Landis, by the way, every time this comes up in interviews, I'm sure people are careful when they bring it up, but when he agrees to talk about it, he is straight up like, it didn't happen like people said it did. They're liars. And yes, it was an upsetting day, but I just have to move on. I know what happened.
Really?
I was there. Yeah.
Because there's a quote online I've read many times that says that every day I live with the Twilight Zone.
Everyone who was there every day lives with the Twilight
No, but I mean,
Zone.
it sounds like he's accepting it in that quote, and you're saying that basically, no, fuck it. Oh, well.
Oh, well, he's accepting that he was on set when something terrible happened, but he's like, it was an accident. The end.
It was an accident.
Of course it was an accident. Yeah, but he's like, he wasn't responsible for any of the circumstances that caused this accident. Is the helicopter pilot, it's, I don't know, bad luck because something went wrong with the helicopter. I can't remember exactly what happened. And it's been in the conversation a lot lately because of what happened on the set of Rust with Alec Baldwin. Accidentally, but obviously some level of carelessness, shooting and killing the cinematographer of that film. Absolutely terrible. But as you said, there's other films where people die and everyone's like, oh, it's just like a bit of trivia. Ben-Hur, famously, didn't people die in the chariot race scenes?
The silent version.
Oh, okay. This stands out because a famous actor died and because children died.
Getting their heads cut off.
Dude.
Something as graphic as that. I don't want to make it sound like I was okay with Landis. I just want to make that point. We're so bad for this, especially the last few years, about, well, I would never do that. Be a big-time filmmaker. A successful big-time filmmaker. And I just said it. He made a movie that was filled with car stunts in Blues Brothers. And maybe they could have gone wrong the first goddamn day. And that would have been the story we found out about. That he was pushing them. We got to do this scene in Chicago with these 8 cop cars or these 25 cop cars, whatever it was. And then somebody got crushed. And that would have been maybe the tragedy. Or on Coming to America, something could have happened. It just happened to be this one. Yeah. But he was the director. And he should have been saying the buck stops here. Although I think Spielberg was on the set. I forget this exact story, so maybe I shouldn't tell it. About Spielberg being involved. But I did read a quote about him saying, nobody should get killed making a movie. So hopefully he learned from that too, because he's made some very big movies with some dangerous shit involved.
Nobody should get killed making a movie. It's just a movie, people. Yeah. We can criticize Landis for the decisions he's made, and I'm not saying Landis is a good guy, sounds like a real piece of work, but the criticism should go to
the business.
The studio system, a business. Everything's so expensive, and money is such a big part of it.
So Landis was charged with manslaughter, but was acquitted, and that took many years to happen. It was around 86, 87, I was reading online. They didn't say 1 year, they had both of those years. And I also read he was bothered by Eddie Murphy not supporting him, which made John Landis mad on the set of Coming to America. I don't know exactly. They didn't say what happened on Coming to America set. And they worked together again. He directed Beverly Hills Cop 3, and he may have done something else with Eddie later on. So
but
whatever
there was
it was,
a famous falling out there.
But
they
patched
had to
it
make up, yeah.
And Eddie was quoted as saying, and the long and the short of it is, that you did put kids in danger. It may not be your fault, but if you want to be a big-time director, and he certainly was, and it sounds like Spielberg slinked off involving this whole thing, too, because he certainly had power.
It's kind of curious how Landis ended up taking all the responsibility for that.
And he kept making movies. He goes to the set of this film right after that. He makes Spies Like Us with Aykroyd and I think Chevy Chase not long after. Coming to America wasn't that long after that, too, and kept making films, made those music videos. So we already talked about Eddie Murphy's credits, what we've covered of him just 2 before this. He does also say the other F word in this, but A, Eddie did that, especially in the stand-up specials a couple of years after he made this movie, and B, that wasn't such a controversial thing in this time frame. He does share a scene in the jail cell with Giancarlo Esposito. I had to say to you, do you recognize him? Oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah, it took me a minute.
I knew he was in it. I didn't know what the scene was he was going to be in, Giancarlo. Or according to him, I heard him say this recently, Giancarlo Esposito. is how he says his name should be pronounced. Anyway, Eddie very quickly became a giantly paid star through the 80s because of 48 Hours and this and Beverly Hills Cop. And he made some duds in there, but he had a great decade. The 90s were good for him. He started making the kids' movies, Dr. Dolittle and whatnot, that succeeded hugely, and of course Nutty Professor. But the 2000s, these 23 years, mostly have either been that he hasn't made much or they've been pretty shitty. We liked Coming to America.
Shrek notwithstanding.
The Shrek movies, yes, the first two especially. But the on-screen stuff, he made a lot of bad ones. But he's such a talented guy. It feels like it's been a waste that he hasn't been in more stuff and more good stuff in 20-plus years.
Can you think of a comedian, though, who's really stayed on top? Comedy, it has to stay fresh because comedy has to surprise you. That's how it works. And that's part of why older comedies aren't as funny. It's part of why, no matter how big a comic actor is, if you tell somebody in 2003, someday Will Ferrell is not going to be able to necessarily get a film greenlit.
Which is true now. Yeah, you're right. I was just thinking him. And then Jim Carrey's another one.
Yeah, Jim Carrey. Adam Sandler actually is a bad example because he has maybe not stayed on top. People love his movies. People still go see his movies.
He might be one of the few exceptions.
Yeah.
But Sandler 80s takes on more serious roles and does great with them, like in Uncut Gems.
Yeah, he's actually a great actor.
And the Meyerowitz stories. And Eddie really didn't do that. Eddie did these pandering, lame comedies. And maybe because he saw how much money he could make by not swearing and not saying the other F word like he did in these kinds of movies and in the stand-up specials.
But he did try serious roles.
Dreamgirls, yeah.
He got the Oscar
but not
nomination
often.
For that.
That's right, his only nomination ever. Dan Aykroyd was also a big star, of course. Ghostbusters, we covered that. That was the year after this. And then the nomination for Driving Miss Daisy, we covered that too. Denham Elliott was coming off of Raiders, and he was nominated a couple years after this for A Room with a View. We already said Ameche won the Oscar for Cocoon a couple years later. Ralph Bellamy, I forgot how many movies that he's been in that we've covered. The Awful Truth, and His Girl Friday is a second banana. He's not really that funny in them. He's got to play the serious role. He's a doctor in Rosemary's Baby, and he's also in Pretty Woman. I think that was, if not the last, one of his last movies where he plays the old man that Richard Gere's character is trying to fleece for his corporate rating, but in the end, Mr. Lewis and I are going to build ships together. Jamie Lee Curtis, I don't know if I actually did say this officially because I think I cut it out when I did, but I feel like I at one point recently with you or by myself said we've never covered her before this year because we have covered her now 3 times. EEAAO, Halloween I did by myself in October, of course, but we also did A Fish Called Wanda, which I forgot we did a couple years ago, so this is the 4th time we've ever covered her and 3 this year alone. Paul Gleason worked or is working, anyway, for nearly 50 years. Was in The Breakfast Club, of course, as the principal, or is the principal a dean of students? I think he's a principal. And he's in Die Hard as well. Kristen Holtby, who does play the girlfriend Penelope, she only did this and Manhunter, the Michael Mann movie. That's it for acting. But she was an Yves Saint Laurent model, so she made her money doing other things. And I think she also got married and had kids. And maybe he's one of those people that said, okay, well, I don't want to be in movies because I don't like it enough, or this is better, I'd rather just be a mother. Jim Belushi's on The Train. Also not that funny, but it can be a funny guy. But he's why Beeks ends up in the gorilla suit, because he's wearing it for that costume party on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis was in Terror Train not long before this, where it's also set on New Year's Eve.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Al Franken and Tom Davis, I think is his name, are the 2 baggage handlers. I think it's because Eddie knew them from SNL. They were writers on SNL. Mm-hmm. Franken eventually, of course, was a performer on that show, but was a writer for a long time before that.
And Aykroyd was on SNL too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was one of the originals. Yeah. Frank Oz is in this because he often was in John Landis movies. Frank Oz, the Yoda, Miss Piggy voices. He did all the great voices. And Bo Diddley is the pawnbroker. Pays $50 for Lewis's watch, and it was worth a lot more than that. So we talked about John Landis' credits, but we didn't mention some of the real big duds. Well, we mentioned one of them, Beverly Hills Cop 3, which I think was a flat-out failure. And you said Blues Brothers 2000. But also Oscar, that Stallone movie that nobody liked when Stallone tried doing comedy in the early 90s. The writers were Timothy Harris and Herschel Weingrod. They also wrote, I think they did these together, Twins and Space Jam. So I don't really like Space Jam very much, but Twins is actually fairly funny.
Twins we revisited recently, and I was like, does not hold up as well as I expected it to. Oh, no, it still has plenty of charm.
That movie's got Arnold's best funny line ever, I think. I've only been driving an hour. The way he says it, that's not that funny a line, although It's Not a Tumor is also up there, and that's Kindergarten Cop. Aaron Russo produced this. He produced The Rose, the Bette Midler film, and also other things with Midler. Movie's 185-1. We rented it on iTunes. Yes, I paid money for a movie. Robert Paynter shot this, Paynter. He shot many for Landis, and also the Superman sequels. I believe all 3 of them in the 80s, but definitely a few of them. The editor, Malcolm Campbell, was Landis' regular cutter through the 80s, but also cut Wayne's World, which we covered. That held up when we saw that. That's still really funny.
Agreed.
Yes, Pete, it is. Milwaukee. Oh, Alice Cooper is not an actor, but man, he's funny in that moment. He delivers that so well. The composer, here he is, Elmer Bernstein with the Oscar nomination. Our 9th time covering him and our 2nd in the last couple of weeks. The 10 Commandments, Sweet Smell of Success, The Magnificent Seven, that was the recent one, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Escape, HUD, Ghostbusters, Far From Heaven, and The Babe, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. And The Marriage of Figaro by, I think it's Mozart, is a theme we hear a lot throughout this movie. So what do you think of the look, the cutting, and the music?
Technically, everybody does a very good job, but I will say this. It doesn't seem to have all that much vision. It's really not trying to do anything new. The actors are by far the best thing about it. The screenplay actually is quite good. Maybe it's not that funny, but even if it wasn't a comedy at all, it would still be a very entertaining film.
That's true.
It felt like there was a lot of missed opportunities to cinematically make it funnier and make it pop more than it did.
What happens next? I say the yacht sinks. Or an orgy. I've been saying that a lot lately. Why not?
An orgy's
You can't blame the guys for wanting to do that. With her and the other women there on that beach, they all live happily ever after in any case, even if being on permanent vacation in paradise would get a little old after a while. We've always said it.
I'd love to find out.
I would like to, too. And you have the freedom to go back the next week if you really want to. But we've often said it. When we're on vacation, we miss the dogs. It's a big part of it. But even beyond that, we get a little restless for our routine at home. Even in January when we've usually traveled. After a week, you feel like, okay, well, I've been here long enough.
We're kind of lame like that. I could never take one of those long trips that some people take.
Yeah. All right, then, last thoughts on Trading Places.
Okay,
which is a Christmas movie.
I forgot to mention, it's still a Christmas tradition to watch this movie in Italy. They play it on TV every Christmas, and people consider it part of the roster of regular Christmas films.
It won't surprise me if when we do post this on the 18th, we're recording it obviously a week or so before, that it will be somewhere on free TV, but we can't wait that long to watch it.
Yeah. So I wasn't blown away, obviously, but I was definitely amused. If you want to talk about the contribution that this film made to the culture, it's making huge stars out of these three actors. Yeah. Before this movie, none of them really were huge stars, and after it, they were.
She didn't do as much great stuff right away like they did the very next year. I think it was a few years before she did. Well, Fish Called Wanda was 88, but she did slowly but surely build up a career as all these things. I don't know if she really did that many horror movies, again, for a while after this time frame. It was mostly doing comedies and, I guess, dramas. I was shocked at just how little we laughed or even chuckled during the movie. Landis' blockbusters aren't really my tempo. I actually say that more often. Whiplash quote, not my tempo. But Eddie and Aykroyd, considering their talents, fairly mediocre. But Eddie's a comedy genius, and I wouldn't say I think he's flailing to be funny like Bill Murray was in Scrooged, or Will Ferrell was in, say, Blades of Glory. But as we said, the story here works. I just wish we'd laughed more. That was the story of Trading Places. In 6 days, our podcasting year together will come to a close as we review Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter. The story's set at Christmas. The film is 55 years old. Oscars were won. The actors are legends. All good reasons to cover it. So we'll celebrate the holiday by talking about royalty. And I say that goes up in 6 days rather than 7 because we're going to be busy with traveling and family things on Christmas Eve and most of Christmas Day. So I'll post the Lion in Winter podcast late at night on Saturday, the 23rd, or maybe early in the day on Christmas Eve. But I said that this is the last show we'll do together because I will be posting an episode on December 29th. There'll be me talking on my own. It's Cary Grant, Myrna Loy, and Shirley Temple, our first Shirley Temple movie, main reason I'm even covering this, in The Bachelor and The Bobby-Soxer, which was also on TCM, and that's free. Didn't pay a cent for that. We also, by the way, will do a special show on New Year's Day. We'll talk about our favorite movies of 2023, even though we won't have seen nearly all of the Oscar baity titles that come out late in the year by that point, but hopefully we'll see some of the other big ones. We've seen a lot of movies. And we'll also finally open up the email bag. It's been a long time. Plenty of you have messaged us or commented or tweetixed in the past few months. Our reply is overdue, especially to the people who regularly communicate with us. So tune into our New Year's Day show and you might get your name shout-outed by a show that doesn't tend to spend that much time shout-outing. Anyway, the Christmas Eve episode is the next thing to look forward to, so the coming attractions opinion question for The Lion in Winter. The storyline throughout the film is that King Henry II wants his son John to be a successor to the throne, while Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine wants their son Richard to be the man in the chair. Which of them do you think deserves the gig? Or is it someone else entirely who deserves to be the future King of England? Or are you like me and think the whole thing is stupid and should be abolished?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about The Lion in Winter. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. Want to give us a Christmas present? Leave us a rating and a review. It's a great way to support the podcast. And we're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis. Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com? And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
About the whole thing with John Landis and Twilight Zone and everything he did, I'm going to retract the positive things I say or cut him some slack. Fuck him! Quote in the movie.
And cut.